How should we adapt source material? It is helpful to compare Rings of Power versus The Chosen. One show has languished and disappointed despite almost all advantages, while the other has wildly succeeded and surprised despite significant headwinds. If we investigate how they are similar and how they are crucially different, we can learn what makes a good show based off popular and well-known source material. More importantly, we will learn respect and creativity matters. Money and resources are not as important as you think, but perhaps most of all, we can learn that humility is essential. Let's compare the Rings of Power and The Chosen. Quickly, let's introduce the shows. I assume most are familiar with Rings of Power, Amazon's adaptation of Tolkien's Second Age of Middle-earth. Their resources, including money, advertising, and connections, ensured that all would be at least somewhat aware of their show. The Chosen, for those unfamiliar, is a multi-season series about the life of Jesus Christ that is made outside the traditional boundaries of Hollywood, meaning it is not produced and funded by a large studio. If at first you assume The Chosen would be a low-grade, cheesy attempt at TV close to the level of a Hallmark movie, I wouldn't blame you. That is what I thought at first. But I guarantee you that is not the case. The show is incredibly well produced and avoids the pitfalls of other Christian entertainment. Here they are, one big dog and one underdog. Two shows that have a few things in common, yet stark differences that we can learn from. Let's begin with the similarities. Respected source material. Both have respected classic source material and long-term plans of multiple seasons to tell an ideally rich and meaningful story. For Rings of Power, it's Tolkien's Second Age, based off info from The Hobbit, Lord of the Rings, and appendices, The Silmarillion, and other work. I believe they only have the rights to the appendices, but in general we can say that they're attempting to adapt the Second Age. For The Chosen, it's of course based off the Bible, specifically the Gospels, books of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Devoted fans. Both series have devoted fans, if you allow me to briefly use that term. And these fan bases can have wildly different views of the source material. Tolkien has fans that have read every novel and note, even devoted scholars, but there are also the casual fans who may have only seen the Peter Jackson movies. In Christianity, there is wildly different interpretations of the Bible and authority on interpretation itself, resulting in many active practices of faith or denominations, Catholic to Lutheran to Calvinist to Baptist to Evangelical, and many more in between. There is the serious study of scholars, theologians, and clergy, combined with the varying study habits of the laity. The main point is that neither show has one simple outline of a fan to cater to, but rather many. Established stories. Both have established stories or lore, meaning that there is at least an outline of events to work within, not a blank canvas. But certain specifics of those stories as well as the characters are not entirely defined, creating room for expansion within the writing. For example, some story elements from Tolkien may be from the notes in the appendix, or some scenes from The Chosen are based off a single line in the Gospels. From the start, this has given the writers some freedom to creatively add depth and even a few surprises. There is even potential, but not necessity, for new characters. Perhaps most importantly, we know how each story ends. Sauron will forge one ring to rule them all, and there will be a war of the last alliance. For Jesus, he will be betrayed by Judas, crucified and resurrected. Our shows are not about the mystery of the end, supposedly, but the richness of the journey. So now, the differences. Approaching the source material. Early on, the showrunners of Rings of Power appeared to make the choice to ignore the documented stories of the Second Age, instead choosing to create their own story with very moderate adherence to the canon. They admittedly asked themselves, can we come up with the novel Tolkien never wrote, and do it as the mega-event series that could only happen now? Through their choices, they told the audience, we will change the story and we will change characters. We can write the story Tolkien never did. We can do it better to surprise the audience. In an interview on the official Rings of Power podcast, showrunners McKay and Payne told a revealing story in reference to Sauron's identity. We wanted him to come into the narrative in an unexpected way, because if you sort of think about the sort of obvious way, it's like, okay, a tall, mysterious, beautiful demigod named Anatar shows up and says, let me help you with all your problems by making some rings. Who's gonna fall for that? As you may know, the Anatar references to the lore that Tolkien had already created. Anatar was the form Sauron took during the time that the rings were forged. That the showrunners completely dismiss and even mock Tolkien's idea is bad enough. Their hubris really shows through here. But what is worse is their inability to consider the complexity behind the idea. This is a wonderfully rich villain who gives people what they want and manipulates them from the inside. We could even say that the character is much like Satan, twisting our desire and leading to our downfall. Everyone knows the end. Sauron forges a ring in secret to rule them all. They've chosen to rewrite key elements to how it happened, so everyone is surprised. They want to subvert all expectations, prioritize novelty over quality, change characters and circumstance, not invest and enhance. Dallas Jenkins, the showrunner, writer, director of The Chosen, laid the foundation for how the show approaches the Gospels. It appears his directive is to honor and for the most part be faithful to the story, certainly the main parts.
It's a historical drama, using the Bible as the primary source of truth and inspiration. So, when I go off script, which is actually the majority of the time, I mean, in the Bible, Jesus never said hello. It's dangerous territory we're walking through and waters to wade in. We operate from, is this plausible? Now, the answer to that question is a tough one sometimes. But does this fit within the character and intentions of Jesus in the Gospels?
He desires to be humble to the source material. Once again, we know the end. Judas betrays, Jesus dies, he is resurrected. But Jenkins believes they can create an interesting story about how they get there, one that leverages the known elements of the story. They have chosen to invest in the characters and details. Creatively, they can illustrate the Gospels with rich performances and plausible expansions. Which brings us to creative perspective. Amazon's crew chose a boring perspective, taking a known character, Galadriel, and pretending this character was present for almost every single key event. By their choice, they've narrowed an expansive world, making bland what was full with flavor. Middle-earth has become Galadriel's Earth. Chosen began with a creative perspective. Let's tell the story from the eyes of the apostles and the disciples. What would encountering the Messiah look like from multiple perspectives? From a hated tax collector, a fallen prostitute, a down-on-his-luck fisherman, an eager student, a dangerous zealot, and many more. How each struggles in this world and how each transforms because of Jesus forms an engaging portion of the series. Modernization. Those involved with Rings of Power were not shy about their priority to modernize every aspect. It felt only natural to us that an adaptation of Tolkien's work would reflect what the world actually looks like, says Lindsay Weber, executive producer of the series. They appeared to say, "We will completely change established lore and characters if needed. We need to be the first this and the first that." The problem here is not that diversity is bad, but rather the over-prioritization of it is. Instead of placing the story first, it appears the agenda was. To reiterate, diversity is good, but it can be harmful if sought as a sole end. The Chosen will honor the story and the history. Diversity is natural, as you can see in the casting. They've created an immersive and realistic setting that serves the story. Contrasted with Rings of Power, we see story was the priority. Fan interaction. The Rings of Power approach to the fandom has been perplexing. They chose to pander to modern influencers in what seems to be an attempt to become popular culture. At best, they assume the loyalty of established fans. At worst, they kick them to the side as a nuisance. Some may say that they even demonized the fans when they expressed their displeasure. Amazon wanted to use their power and tell everyone to like this. Be grateful you get anything involving Middle-earth. Be grateful for us. The Chosen's message was, we will ask for help from the fans. Yet understand we cannot please everyone all of the time. From the start, Jenkins and his staff worked with multiple denominations to tell a faithful story that didn't ostracize or offend. They continue to consult with scholars who are Catholic, Messianic Jewish, evangelical, and maybe more. Jenkins doesn't want to only show his evangelical viewpoint. He respects and therefore incorporates other denominations. There is an underlying foundation of humility. We serve the story and we are grateful for you, the fans. The money. For Rings of Power, money was no issue when it came to production. Amazon has shown a willingness to write checks with lots of zeros, infinite ads, fancy sets, special effects, etc. In effect, there are no limits. But perhaps ironically, the end goal was and is to make as much money as possible. This needs to be a global hit. They need to acquire Prime subscribers. The Chosen's path was, we will crowdsource. We will ask the fans to pay money and be involved in the journey and not let big business get in the way. Hollywood will not corrupt this show. So money is an issue. We'll have to be creative in every aspect we can. How we produce and write and direct and market. Even how we cast extras. There are limits. We are not necessarily seeking to make money, but to make a great show that lasts, that tells the most important story. And not that making money is bad, by the way, but see the larger point when comparing the two. All of this relates to marketing. Having money and power and an immensely large customer base has its advantages, and Amazon did not hesitate to use their immense platform. We saw ubiquitous paid ads and reminders on Amazon boxes and more. Continuing with their emphasis on popular culture, Amazon chose to pay for influence on social media and throw big fancy premieres. Any trick to create hype and monopolize attention. Their target audience was as broad as possible, attempting to appeal to the masses while clearly ignoring the core fan base. They used the best techniques money could buy, but there is marketing that cannot be bought. Which brings us to the Chosen's approach. Their marketing can be described as organic. Honest interviews on podcasts, behind-the-scene features, and most importantly, word of mouth. People discover The Chosen rather than it being force-fed. Friends, family, communities share the series. It's how I discovered the show. It is essentially tied to the fans and what has been working. As the show has grown, they have actively chosen to listen to and reward the fans. They used a popular line from the show, "Get used to different." A line that latched on within fan groups and grew organically to be a central marketing message. And as they have earned more financial resources, they've been experimenting with more traditional forms of ads, but these techniques support the word-of-mouth marketing at its core. In totality, the Rings of Power approach to creating this story is top-down, centralized, full of arrogance, agenda, and financial incentives, while the Chosen approach is bottom-up, decentralized, full of humility and respect in order to spread the gospel. Hypothetically, if The Chosen was poorly written or if it didn't respect the Gospels or different denominations, if the creators didn't have the humility or just decided to repackage the story with better visuals or worse, add modern ideologies to manipulate the story, then the show would have failed to gain any traction. The crowdfunding would have never materialized. The market would have rightfully shut the project down and future seasons would never happen. This demonstrates how important this bottom-up decentralized model is. People have voted with their attention and money. This model does not allow for bad shows. Because of the deep pockets of Mr. Bezos and those at Amazon, the unsuspecting public are being force-fed their mediocre Rings of Power product, allowing for ideologues to run rampant inside the world of Tolkien. A sad reality indeed. We can't really vote with our money, but we can vote with our attention. Be aware of the power this has. I hope you see differences between these shows and the lessons inside. One seems to ask, how can I use this story to serve me? The other asks, how can I serve this story, serve the truths inside? One question led by hubris, the other humility. One show is being led into mediocrity and eventual obscurity, the other led into perhaps lasting impact. By the end, I suspect, the creators of Rings of Power wish they had chosen a different path.